Looks like we're going.
Cool. Waiting to see if, oh, there it is. I always wonder if my phone's going to tell me.
Right.
So, I did.
I'm in my brother's room these days, and I just realized you can really see it today. Like he's got like all kinds of plants in his room. Like I think there's like 15 plants in here, legitimately. A lot of them are in tiny pots and stuff.
Yeah.
I just realized in particular when I looked over my shoulder, and there were like 4 plants all showing.
Yeah. Well, and a towel hanging over the thing.
And a towel. Yeah.
Yeah.
Gotta stay dry.
Hi, Donna. Good to see you. Glad you're here. All right. We got a couple people on. Thanks everybody for joining us. We're going to be in Ephesians chapter 5 again, looking at verses 1 through 21. We decided to do a couple of sessions on that just because we knew there was a lot of information there. A couple brief reminders. The 6 chapters of Ephesians can be broken into 2 parts. The first 3 chapters are God's work toward us, like what God has accomplished and what God has done for the church. And the second half of the book is our walk in response to God's work. So first 3 chapters are the privileges, the blessings of being a Christian. 4 through 6 are the responsibilities and the expectations of being a Christian. And since chapter 4, we've been looking at a lot of things that talk about how we walk worthy, whether that's collective in our attitudes and in our diligence to do our part, or whether that's in changing our thinking and changing our behavior so that we can be, chapter 5, verse 1 says, imitators of God as beloved children. So we talked about a few things in 5, 1 through 21, a lot of those responsibilities of what kind of lifestyle and life must we live as saints. Some things that just shouldn't be true about us, shouldn't be named among us. There shouldn't be a hint of them if we really are children of God. We also pointed out that there's kind of a high calling in this text, or like a priority put on figuring out what God really wants, letting no one deceive us, trying to find out what the will of the Lord is, living in a way that's not foolish, but understanding the will of the Lord. So again, as Christians, we're not just paying attention to our behavior, we're paying attention to our education and what is it that we're learning and what is it we're being led by. That's a few things we've discussed. Anything you want to add to that before I read it again?
No, I think it's pretty good. I mean, this section is great. It's really trying to reshape the way we think about ourselves and how that plays out in the world.
Yeah, good. All right, so I'll read 1 through 21 again, and Ben will start us off. And I kind of introduced a question. Maybe I'll remind us of that after we read it. So, all right. Therefore, be imitators of God as beloved children, and walk in love, just as Christ also loved you and gave himself up for us, an offering and a sacrifice to God as a fragrant aroma. But immorality or any impurity or greed must not even be named among you, as is proper among saints. And there must be no filthiness and silly talk or coarse jesting, which are not fitting, but rather giving of thanks. For this you know with certainty, that no immoral or impure person or covetous man who is an idolater has an inheritance in the kingdom of Christ and God. Let no one deceive you with empty words, for because of these things the wrath of God comes upon the sons of disobedience. Therefore do not be partakers with them. For you were formerly darkness, but now you are light in the Lord. Walk as children of light. For the fruit of the light consists in all goodness and righteousness and truth, trying to learn what is pleasing to the Lord. Do not participate in the unfruitful deeds of darkness, but instead even expose them. For it is disgraceful even to speak of the things which are done by them in secret. But all things become visible when they are exposed by the light. For everything that becomes visible is light. For this reason it says, awake, sleeper, and arise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you. Therefore be careful how you walk, not as unwise men, but as wise, making the most of your time because the days are evil. So then, do not be foolish, but understand what the will of the Lord is. And do not get drunk with wine, for that is dissipation, but be filled with the Spirit, speaking to one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing and making melody with your heart to the Lord, always giving thanks for all things in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ to God, even the Father, and be subject to one another in the fear of Christ. So one of the things that we touched on last time that we said we'd talk a little bit more about was when it talks about in verses 6 through 14 or so, us living lives as children of light in a dark world. And it actually says don't associate with them in some versions in verse 7, or don't participate with them. And then in verse 20, again, verse 11, don't participate in these things. How do we do that as Christians? Like, how do we balance between being in the world but not of the world? Do we just isolate ourselves? Do we protect ourselves? How much of it is that versus sort of living right in the middle of it without, to being too much affected by it? I think that's a difficult sort of thing to figure out. And so I wanted to talk more about that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. One interesting thing that I found after we had kind of talked about is that word, do not associate or do not participate.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the exact word is only used one other time in the New Testament in Ephesians. And it's in chapter 3 and verse 6, where Paul was talking about the gospel that he preached and the mystery that was revealed. This mystery, chapter 3, verse 6, this mystery is that the Gentiles are fellow heirs, members of the same body, and partakers or associates of the promise in Christ Jesus through the gospel. So, I mean, that doesn't solve it, but it is interesting that he kind of presents these two associations that I can have. I can either associate myself with or be a partner with Christ and the people of his kingdom, or I can associate or partner with people of the world. There's like a derivative of this word that gets used elsewhere in the New Testament. And one of the images that was pretty helpful for me was in Luke 5, where whenever Jesus was there and they were fishing and they had the big catch of fishes, when Peter was like, oh, we fished all night, we didn't catch anything. Jesus said, just go do it. It said they called to their partners, Luke 5, verse 7, which I think is a pretty helpful image. And to me, that makes sense of what Paul's saying here in Ephesians 5 is, who are your partners? Who are the people that you're working with? Or to use the imagery in chapter 5, verse 8 here in Ephesians, who are you walking with? Who does it look like you belong to? And I don't just mean like we're doing it for appearances, but I mean, when you look yourself in the mirror, whenever you examine the way your life is, who do you fit in with more? Do you fit in with people of the world, or do you fit in with people in the Lord? And I don't mean fitting in like in some sort of social or whatever kind of way that we may judge it, but really verse 9, he gives us some standards: goodness, righteousness, truth. Yeah. Those are not things that define the world. Those are the exact opposite. And so I need to ask myself, is my behavior, are the things that I'm pursuing making me a partner with goodness, righteousness, and truth? Or is it partnering me with evil, lies, wickedness, and all that sort of thing? I don't know that that's terribly practical, which kind of bothers me, because I wish there was a really clear cut, here's the rules. You need to hang out this many hours with your Christian friends, that many hours with your non-Christian friends. If you recognize ABC thing happening, then you need to take action X. Like I wish there was that. And I think there's more even in this text that kind of helps us with some of the practicalities and maybe some tests we can give ourselves. But just kind of framing that up, I think is helpful. But it's not just about, am I ever around worldly people, or am I ever around godly people? But it's about, who am I partnering with in my life and in my character?
Yeah, no, I think those are really helpful things to think about. But it does come down to sometimes like, how does the rubber meet the road here? And like, what does this mean for everyday life? One of the things I think about is this section that we started back in chapter 4, verse 17, when he was talking about walking the way that the Gentiles walk. One of the things it says about us is that we were being sort of challenged or struggling because of the lusts of deceit that we had. and that language, that we laid aside the old self, this is verse 22, which is being corrupted in accordance with the lusts of deceit. Our old life, we had desires, things we wanted to do, but they were deceptive, and they made us believe that it was going to be the way to live life and the way to be happy or whatever. It was the path of peace for us. And I think what's hard is when somebody becomes a Christian, most of what it sounds like they're being told is, hey, be really careful about being with those people, being unequally yoked to them and being like partners and close with them and participating in the things that frankly we still maybe want to do. We're still trying to get that lust, that desire out of our life. And so I do think there's a way that the Bible talks to people in this way, that takes into account maturity and immaturity, or readiness or not ready. People want to point to Jesus and say, well, Jesus was always hanging around, like tax collectors and sinners and people like that. But so if we're going to be Christians, let's hang around them. I used to try to use excuses like that for my bad friends when my dad would talk to me about that. And he'd be like, well, be not deceived. Evil communications corrupt good morals, 1 Corinthians 15. Don't be deceived. I'm not really Jesus. Not yet, like, I guess if I thought about that more, if we're going to point to Jesus as the example, when he was 12 years old, he wasn't hanging around sinners. You know what I mean? He was hanging around, they were sinners in the temple, but I mean, he was hanging around people talking about those kind of things.
Yeah.
By the time he began his public ministry, he had a different sort of thing going on. So I guess what it boils down to is we have to be honest about whether or not we're being influenced more than we're influencing, or if we're really strong enough to fight the temptations, or if they're even temptations anymore. There are things that I think I'm so far past that I don't want to do anymore, that just no one's going to introduce that to me and make me think, oh, I really want to do that again. So,
and I like that framing of influencing thing. I think that's one of the ways we can be honest. In verses 11 through 14, he says, not only are you not supposed to associate, because you're not supposed to live like that. You shouldn't be partnering in those behaviors anymore, because you're not a part of it. You're light in the Lord. You're children of light. You're children of love. You've left all that behind. He says in verse 11, we should be exposing the deeds of darkness. Verse 12, we shouldn't even be speaking about those things. And I think the point being, I think if you're going to expose them in some way, you have to speak about them. But I think the point is, they're shameful things. They're not things that we should be talking about in some sort of celebratory or with any sort of interest, or as little as possible. We don't want to mention them or talk about them because they're shameful. Paul talks about them in this very text, so I don't think it means you can never ever mention the sins of the world. We have to in exposing them. But anyway, verse 13, he mentions again things being exposed. And here he's kind of talking about us being exposed, being visible as children of light, I think is what verses 13 and 14 are saying. So I think the part of the test and the thing I need to be honest with, and this is where it's important for us to remember the context. The first thing he talks about in the worthy walk is working together. The second thing he talks about is the inner transformation. And now the third thing he talks about is how this carries out into the world. One of the ways I'm going to make sure that I stay honest is when I stay closely connected to my brothers and sisters in the body, where they can challenge me with questions like this. Are you exposing deeds of darkness with your worldly friends and associates? Or are you just participating with them, or just keeping your mouth shut, or laughing along, or not trying to cause any problems? This text makes it pretty clear that my interaction with the world, not that I need to be a jerk, chapter 5, verse 2, walk in love,
right,
but I need to be exposing evil. And if I'm not exposing the deeds of darkness, then if I'm not already associating or partnering with the deeds of darkness, I'm on the fast track to doing that.
Sure,
My relationship with the world has to be an influence, to shine the light of Christ, to promote goodness, and to shine a light on just how bad evil is.
Yeah, very good. I think those are all practical things. I think this is worth thinking through. And you're raising kids, like I'm still raising some boys, but they're getting older now and kind of making some of their own decisions. But that's a lot of what we talked about is, hey, I'm not going to remove you out of the world or expect you to just never be around anybody that isn't doing the wrong thing. But are you ready to be around these people who are going to be pulling at you and making fun of you and, you know, trying to make you feel weird for taking stands when you need to take stands and stuff like that. That's powerful stuff, and that's complicated. So I do think there's just a lot of good discussion to have around that, which I don't want to take all of our time on that, but
Yeah. But just one more thing I'll say on that is this whole section that's been about making, you mentioned it earlier, it's about us thinking right about what God's done and what he expects and seeking his will and so forth. And that's what prepares us for being able to be a light in the world and to not become partners with the evil deeds of darkness. I do think this goes back to the beginning part of chapter 4. We're to be equipped for the work of service. Yeah. The work of service, at least a large part of it for a Christian, is to shine the light. It's verse 14 of chapter 5. Christ has given you light. Now wake up and shine. That's the work of a big part of the work of service. And so one thing we need to be focused on in our relationships with brethren is to have open dialogue about how are you doing at your job, or how are you doing in dealing with that temptation? I know you said you struggle with that. How's that been going lately? Are you doing pretty good about that? And what's going on? Are you teaching your friends and neighbors? What can I do to help you with that? What's holding you back? Those kinds of conversations are really important with each other as Christians so that we'll be equipped to go out and serve in this way.
Yeah, very good. You know, in verse 14, when Isaiah 60 is quoted, well, it's kind of an amalgamation quote from a few places, but when it says, awake, sleeper, rise from the dead, Christ will shine on you. That sort of indicates that a lot of us as Christians sometimes just forget that there's a reason we're in the world, you know. And then the next couple verses, when it says in verse 16, making the most of your time because the days are evil, making the most of your time. Like, think about that with a lazy person. It's like, hey, there's only so much today to get your work done. Get up, wake up, don't sleep till noon. You know, and what a tragedy for somebody to live 20 years as a Christian and then finally wake up to, oh, wow, I'm here in this world for a reason. And you look back and you think, all those 20 years I lived with people that were trying to formulate, like, what's life about? What's all of that? The sooner we wake up and understand, like, we're in this world for a reason, and we can live a life like this where we really are children of light exposing darkness, the better. I'm going to say something. This might be a little bit controversial, a little bit hard to hear. I need to check myself on this. A lot of times, it's a lot more comfortable for me to expose the darkness that I perceive around Christians. You know what I mean? Like, have you noticed how much is going on right now where people are like, Christians seem to be firing at each other, like, hey, you got a problem, you got a problem, you got a problem. And largely, like, the whole world is being ignored. Mm-hmm. And somebody will say, like, well, no, it's really important that we get this across to our brothers and sisters. Totally agree.
That's right.
Like, there's ways we sharpen each other. The text tells us the reason we assemble is to sharpen each other, to stir each other up to love and good deeds, to challenge each other. I get that. But I'm just going to be frank. A lot of people I know spend all their time doing that because it's so safe. Yeah. It's so much safer to, like, come at you or come at other Christians, you know, than to really say, like, I'm going to live my life and try to, like, show people the right way. What that does is that makes us talk about certain things that are really popular out there to talk about. And then, like, everybody's like, oh, you're one of the good Christians who tells all the other Christians how bad they are. Instead of us saying, like, no, look, listen, there's all kinds of evil in the world. Sure, there's some of it that's crept into the church and we need to challenge each other. But I'm largely just going to ignore all of that and come at you because then I look good out there. And that's how I'm going to be an influence. Like, we got to be careful of some of that stuff.
Yeah. And I'm not going to get in trouble because in the church, like, if I rebuke you, you got to be like, yeah, you're right. You should rebuke me. You know, like, we kind of have this built-in mechanism for what we perceive to be a version of humility or whatever. But yeah, that's exactly right. If I'm not willing to speak about evil in the world around me, then do I really care about evil, or what am I doing? What am I really talking about?
Right. Anyway, that's a challenge for me.
I think there are situations where that can go the other way too.
Oh,
where
absolutely.
people, and I know you're not speaking against that, but I'm just saying, I think that's this. The point is, like, light really doesn't care what the reason for the darkness is or where the darkness is. Light just shines everywhere it is, and it exposes all the darkness, not just certain types of darkness. And that's got to be us.
Yeah, very good. Very good. All right, what else, man? What else do you see before we get through this text here?
I think 15 through 21 is great in the context of what we've been talking about. A lot of times I'll read this as almost like, okay, new section, because in my mind I'll read kind of distinctly like the walks, right? Walk in love. Okay, here's some stuff about love. Walk in light. Here's some stuff. Walk carefully or walk circumspectly. But it seems to me that the verses 15 through 21 really give some practical, at least attitude type things for how we can make sure that we walk in the light and walk in love and complete the transformation that we saw in chapter 4 that we're supposed to live out. So much of this is about the way we think. Walk circumspectly means, like, look around where you're walking, pay attention to what's going on around you. He talks about not being foolish but understanding in verse 17, and then he speaks about a bunch of things that relate to our mindset. That
Okay.
if we don't get those right, we're never going to be able to walk as children of light.
Yeah. Why do you think drunkenness is like the only thing he brings up here? Like, I mean, of all the things like he could say about, hey, wake up, be a light, be the person you're supposed to be in the world, understand God's will, and then he's like, don't get drunk.
He meant to put it in chapter 4. He just forgot in the list in chapter 4, and he's like, I got to squeeze it in somewhere. Can't go back. He didn't have erasers back then, so no. I mean, to me, it fits in with that concept of you need to take this seriously. Don't be deceived. Don't get tripped up. Don't get caught up in the ways of the world. And drunkenness is a way that people very obviously do stupid stuff and get deceived and trip themselves up. So to me, I mean, I think he mentions it as a danger, an intrinsic danger. Like, drunkenness itself is bad, but it also serves as a metaphor for the entire thing. It's sort of like in the Proverbs, where the proverb writer is constantly talking about women and the dangers of women. But then as you read the first 9 chapters of Proverbs, he's talking about women, but he's also using the dangers of women as sort of a metaphor of all temptation and all potential slip ups. And it seems that's the way I read it, at least. I don't know. What do you think fits it in here? That's kind of the way I read it.
I guess, like, the longer I live, the more I realize, and I even see stuff where Jesus would talk like this when he would talk about people being weighed down in drunkenness when he returns. You know what I mean? Look, the world's hard. I don't think there's anybody that doesn't read this and go, yeah, man, the world's a dark place. There's a lot of evil things going on around here. And each of us kind of has to figure out how we're going to respond to that. So what do some of us do? Some of us just sleep through it. It's like, man, I'm just going to sleep through it. But other people, the way they deal with difficulty in their life is they turn to some sort of power, some sort of substance, something that can dissipate them enough to not be hurt by the world or not be, like, sober about what's happening. And honestly, humanity's always done that. From the very beginning of time, mankind has found, this is a huge rabbit trail, but they've been sorcerers. Like, they've used things on the earth or things in the heavens to find answers to emotional and psychological and spiritual things. So instead of going to God for their anxiety, you'll never read a Bible verse that says, hey, don't be anxious. At the end of the day, if you're anxious, take a little wine for your anxiety's sake. No, God would say, if you're anxious, come talk to me and pray. Now, if you have a stomach issue, drink a little wine for your stomach's sake. Like, we Christians need to figure out, like, be careful about what we're using to deal with the dark world, and I'm not going to go much further than that, except to say, I think there's a reason why he'd say, listen, you've got some options here: the Spirit of God, or these other powerful things that the rest of the world uses to deal with their difficulty in the world. And Christians, you just need to pursue the right things here. Put into your heart, your mind, your life, the right things that will empower you to live in a wise way in this world.
Yeah. No, I think that makes some sense too, especially because a lot of times, at least why people get drunk is everything is dark. And so I'm just going to go kind of deeper into it.
Mhm.
Like, it's not like people, I mean, even people who are very pro drunkenness, they're not going to say like, oh, I know this is going to solve anything. It's just going to cloud me so thickly that I'm not even going to be able to see what's wrong. Whereas the things that the one that right after he mentions in verse 19, addressing one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing, making melody to the Lord with all your heart. That's a really hopeful thing. And that's something that makes you not just go deeper into a darkness, or, like people say, alcohol is a depressant,
Sure.
Well, this is the opposite of that. Like singing songs to God, singing the Psalms, they're things that give you hope. They're things that turn you up. They're things that give you a perspective that, hey, things are bad now, but there's a future of something better coming. And even the next thing in verse 20, giving thanks always and for everything to God the Father, that's looking around and not just seeing all the darkness, but also saying, wow, you know what, in spite of all this, you can go back to chapter 1 in Ephesians. I've been adopted. I'm chosen. I have hope of a brighter future. I have wisdom from God to know how to navigate this. I've been changed and transformed. So the things that he juxtaposes with drunkenness here are definitely things that, hey, look above the darkness of the world, look to God, find the good things, and use that as strength rather than the powers of an elixir.
Yeah, that's right. Well, and you even brought up like the music, the singing in our hearts, I think about my young life, and I was always trying to find things in my life that made me feel better, you know. And so things like music were a big thing. Like think about how many people, like what they do is they put their earbuds in, they play their music, they feel better. It's like music feels. I'm not saying that, and somebody made this comment, it's not necessarily bad things in the world that we reach out and grab onto to help us. It's just not the best thing. You know, what's better than listening to music to sort of calm you down? I mean, that's what God had to do with Saul because he had an evil spirit. So David had to play for him. But who was the more peaceful, David or Saul? David was. Where'd the songs come from for him? From him. Like there's something better than looking externally to find the peace that God wants us to give internally. Let the spirit be in us. Don't be a spirit that you put into your body. Let the music be in us, not music that you listen to on the outside. Again, I'm not saying in and of themselves that there are bad things there, but God's trying to introduce, how do you become a child of light? How do you get that light within you so that it comes out? And that's really what Christianity is a peace that passes understanding inside of us, a light that comes from within, living waters that well up within us because of the Spirit of God being in us. We have to pursue the right things and notice the subtleties of how we find peace and comfort. And then don't be surprised if it's like, well, how come I can't like reach anybody else with the gospel? And it's like, well, they look at me and they're like, well, you basically find peace the same way I do. We listen to music together, we go on jogs together, we go fishing together, we go hunting together, we get out in nature together. All of that is helpful, but that's not the internal peace that comes with being a child of God.
Yeah. So how do you think verse 21 fits into, and in some ways this will lead into what we talk about in some of the future discussions, but how do you think verse 21 fits in with that little collection that we just went through?
So a lot of what he was talking about back in 4 with the behaviors are sins against each other.
Mm-hmm.
Bitterness, anger, clamor, stealing, not thinking of others, using words in ways that tear others down, not building each other up. Being subject to one another because we fear God, because we respect God and we understand the relationship we should have here. It's just, I think that's the key to Christianity. Like when I see you as more important than myself, Philippians 2, like we studied, when I prefer you, so many of the sins of my life are going to fall away because I'm trying to honor you. I'm trying to, be the best I can for you. And that's in a way to summarize all these laws. It's kind of like when Jesus summarized the law with, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. Look, I'm always subject to myself. Loving you as I love me. Like, I'm always subject to myself, my desires, my will, what I want. That's what I do. So Christianity is, all right, figure out a way to do that with other people, you know?
Yeah. And that's so opposite to the spirit of darkness. The spirit of darkness is, how can I use other people for my advantage? That's really the sins of chapter 5, verses 3 through 5 are all things about using people for my advantage. But children of light are to be people who say, how can I offer myself? Because of how Christ has offered himself for me, I need to give myself. And so much of this stuff about thinking the right way, I mean, even drunkenness is an insanely selfish act. I want to just get in my own little world. I want to just go down into this dark hole. That's all I want.
Yeah.
Even
people normally want to do it with each other in a room, you know, and then forget they were together later. But.
Exactly. That's, I mean, no joke, right? But even, I mean, that's the thing, right? I mean, so even when you do it with other people, there's this sort of, I'm doing it for myself. I'm not doing it so I can aid the community or do some sort of great grand thing or whatever. And I just think it's a really fitting summation of this section. Like you said, going all the way back to chapter 4 and verse 1. This whole thing has been about learning to revere Christ so much that we don't think about how I can take from others, but I can offer myself for the good of others.
Yeah, that's right. All right, man, we're out of time. Thanks everybody for being with us. We'll pick up here on Monday and start in chapter 5, verse 22.
That was fun. Thanks, guys.